Perfect. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Radix Media official bookend event, Can Science Fiction Change the World? Some of you may know this, but currently the Brooklyn Book Festival is underway. It's one of the largest literary festivals in America, and the most wonderful thing about it is that it is completely free. Today and tomorrow, purveyors of publishing, independent publishers, established publishers, literary magazine publishers, authors, zine makers are going to collect at Brooklyn Borough Hall. There's going to be all-day events that are free and that you're welcome to attend. And there are bookend events before and after the main festival day. And it's a great way to sort of get a chance to interact with authors and publishers and buy tons of books, which is, bad for the bank account, but great for, personal growth. That's the good way to justify it. And we are Radix Media. We're very excited and proud to be bringing this official bookend event. A little bit about us. We are a worker-owned union printer and independent publisher. We've been based in New York for the last decade, and we are focused on championing experimental voices, underrepresented voices, and literature that doesn't often get the time of day in the traditional publishing model. That is the kind of work that excites us. I want to briefly introduce my fellow co-worker, Nick Hurd, who is here, and I'd like to invite Nick to come and say a few words about Radix Media.
Thanks, Meher. I think you summed it up well. We are a printer. We've been a printer for 10 years in Brooklyn. We print pretty much everything on paper. We do all kinds of political printing, posters, books, zines, all kinds of stuff. And 5 years ago, we started publishing books. We just thought was a great way to engage with the community and utilize all of our resources and our machines and stuff to print great works. We're so excited to publish Many Worlds this year, and we have another book coming out in just a few weeks. We Are Many, which is a great comic book anthology published in conjunction with Sci-fi Comics. And the theme is defending sex workers and women's human rights. Check us out, radixmedia.org. And we do have a coupon that Meher will put in the chat. If you want to visit our website, we have a little discount on our books this weekend. So check us out. And if you're in New York, check us out tomorrow at the book fair. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. So I've added the stuff in the chat. That is our website. Feel free to check us out and check out our catalog. We have a ongoing coupon code until Monday for only our bookend audience. The coupon code is called bookend, and you can get anything from our website, including our published titles or our stationery. We've got posters, we've got postcards, we've got fun prints, and you can get that with it for a 10% discount. And if you're planning to visit the Brooklyn Book Festival tomorrow, you can catch us at booth 603. You can come chat with us. If you're a fellow author, come talk to us about your work, come talk to us about what you're working on. If you just want to chit chat, say hello, that's perfectly fine. We love to talk. And so please join us tomorrow. I'm also realizing that I never actually introduced myself. Thank you, Nick. My name is Meher, by the way, and I'm going to be hosting this event for today. And my pronouns are she, her, and I handle editorial and publicity operations at Radix Media. So on that note, now feels like a good time to segue into today's panel, the reason you're all here. So the germ of the idea came to us when we were working on Many Worlds that Nick spoke about, and Cadwell held a copy of the book for us. Many Worlds is this incredible collaborative anthology. Some of the authors of Many Worlds are here, Rebecca, Cadwell, and Justin. And the idea for Many Worlds is the Many Worlds Forum, where a bunch of authors come together and they share conceits and ideas and sort of do a collaborative world building exercise. So everything they work in sort of groups and smaller subsets, There it is, the copy. The idea is collaborative, but also embodying cooperative principles, which is great for a worker-owned publisher like us. And it made us think about how science fiction is always at the forefront of imagining not just the worst of cataclysmic changes that could happen, but also an alternative, alternative landscape to our world, an alternative version where things could be better. And it's very fascinating that at this moment, science fiction is enjoying its most exciting and, dare I say, profitable times in popular culture. Everything from TV show to cinema to comics. I mean, literature was always, a great vanguard of science fiction imagination, but at a popular cultural level, it is happening across platforms, across streaming channels. And the sort of rush to predict what is going to happen next is real. Everybody wants to have the sort of Nostradamus, tongue with their work that they put out there. But at the same time, it made us think whether science fiction can also be a pathway to designing a better tomorrow and not just, warning us about a better tomorrow. And it made us think if science fiction, whether it can change the world, but immediately whether it can change the way we publish, the way the publishing industry works, the way we work with each other, the way we interact and collaborate with each other. And so to that effect, we have put together this incredible panel before you. I'm going to introduce all of their names very quickly. And I will also be sharing their bios in the chat as they are talking. And I'm also going to be sharing links to some of their recently published works, so you can go check it out and buy a copy for yourselves. So here are the bios of our panelists and our moderator. First up, we have Luke Danny Blue, who is the author of Pretend It's My Body from Feminist Press, one of our favorite independent publishers. The book was published in 2022. It was a Kirkus Best Fiction Book of 2022, longlisted for the Story Prize. Luke's fiction draws inspiration from 19th century Latin American fiction, Yiddish humor, shaggy dog stories, and 1980s daytime television. Originally from Michigan and prone to geographic instability, Luke resides in Providence, Rhode Island, where they are working on a time travel novel. And I forgot to mention that Luke uses they, them pronouns. Welcome, Luke. It is so fantastic to have you here. I personally love this book, and I'm so excited to hear everything you have to say today. Our next panelist is Rebecca Bergman, who is the author of the debut novel, The Museum of Human History, out of Tin House in 2023, and a contributor to the anthology Many Worlds or The Simulacra, out from Radix Media, also 2023. Rebecca received a BA in Literary Arts from Brown University and an MFA in Fiction from the New School. Her writing has been published or is forthcoming in Electric Lit, Poets and Writers, LitHub, Tor.com, Wigleaf, Joyland, and elsewhere. She lives in Rhode Island with her family. Rebecca teaches virtual writing classes with the teaching cooperative Writing Collab. Read more at RebeccaBergman.com. Welcome, Rebecca. Congratulations on your debut novel. So excited to have you here. Our next panelist is the wonderful Cadwell Turnbull, who is the award-winning author of The Lesson and No Gods, No Monsters. His short fiction has appeared in The Verge, Lightspeed, Nightmare, Asimov's Science Fiction, and several anthologies, including the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2018 and the year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy 2019. His novel, The Lesson, was the winner of the 2020 Newcomb Institute Literary Award in the debut category. The novel was also shortlisted for the VCU Campbell Award and longlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award. His novel, No Gods, No Monsters, is the winner of a Lambda and a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award. Turnbull grew up on St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Welcome, Cadwell. Hello. Our next panelist is Justin C. Key, who is a speculative fiction writer and psychiatrist whose short stories have appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Strange Horizons, Tor.com, Escape Pod, and Lightspeed. A graduate of Clarion West, his debut short story collection, The World Isn't Ready for You, is available now from HarperCollins. When Justin isn't writing, working with patients, or exploring Los Angeles with his wife, he's chasing after his 3 young and energetic children. Welcome, Justin. Glad you could take the time off and join us today. Appreciate you being here. And it gives me so much honor to introduce our moderator for today's event, the incredible Sheila Williams, who is the multiple Hugo Award-winning editor of Asimov's Science Fiction magazine and the winner of the 2017 Kate Woolham Solstice Award for distinguished contributions to the science fiction and fantasy community. With Rick Wilbur, she is the co-founder of the Dell Magazine's Award for Undergraduate Excellence in Science Fiction and Fantasy, which has been bestowed on the best short story by an undergraduate student since 1994. In addition, Sheila is the editor or co-editor of 26 anthologies. Her most recent anthology, Entanglements, Tomorrow's Lovers, Families, and Friends, was published as part of the MIT Press 12 Tomorrow series. Welcome, Sheila. Thank you so much for joining us and for guiding what I'm sure will be an incredibly illuminating conversation. I'm going to pass the mic over to you and let you take over from here on out. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And I hope I'm speaking loud enough. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for inviting me. And I hope I live up to your expectations, Meher. I was really pleased that I had a chance to read through these books by the authors on this panel today. I was really impressed by the quality of the writing and the thought behind it, the craft. And it was a delightful experience, and I could say, having read many of the stories and the novel, and that I highly endorse running out and buying these books at the book festival or any other time. My first question, I thought I'd start, rather than get to the future, I thought I'd start right now in the present. I think of we think of science fiction often as a predictive literature. If this current terrible I don't think that's coming from me. If this thing goes on, is it going? How will it get worse? How will this affect our society to its detriment in the future? But I think more often, science fiction is really a metaphor for what's actually happening today. A way of looking at today's world, really. And I wondered if each of you could comment on whether you do or you don't use speculative fiction as a way to reflect on current issues in your works. And I thought perhaps you could comment on that, and specifically perhaps in the books that are out or coming out now. I don't know who would like to go first. Perhaps Rebecca, you're the first one I see here. Right now.
Sure. Yeah. I love this question. And this is like something I was thinking about in preparing for this panel, because that's how I usually think about speculative fiction too, is much more, or I think what interests me, and when I turn to the speculative, it's more to look at things as they are from a different angle than to look at things as they might be, or to try to predict the future. I think of like the way time travel can just be sort of like a metaphor for like the distance between people, or the way time works on relationships. Or I was also thinking about like all of the different multiverse sort of stories out there, and like everything everywhere all at once, and how popular that is. And just this idea of like the choices we make, maybe forking our lives in different ways. I think people are endlessly interested in that. And I feel like science fiction gives you the playground to kind of just like play those things out quite literally with fictional technologies and fictional artifice and all of that. In my novel, that's definitely where the speculative came in. There's like this biotech company that's doing all sorts of evil things that, I was really thinking a lot about big pharma and capitalism. And I feel like science fiction lets you be political without being moralistic, because it's a metaphor in that way. Or you can be kind of like touch on something emotional without being overly sentimental or cliche, with like the time travel example. Yeah.
Cadwell, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I love Rebecca's answer. It's how I think about it too. I often use science fiction to kind of have a conversation with the present, to talk about culture or social systems. And I remember, when working on I'm working on a trilogy, an urban fantasy trilogy. And you think that that wouldn't, come into it, but it comes into it a lot, particularly around how in the story monsters come out to the world, and I have the world respond with ambivalence. There's some people believe and a lot of people don't, and then there's like basically a culture war around that. And when I first was working on it, I thought this would not be believable. But then, I was working on it during a pandemic, and where we saw the split that happened. And so it's a really good tool to have those kind of conversations without talking about those things directly. And sometimes, often by accident, things will come up when you're working with speculative fiction that you'll find like surprising parallels to reality. And it's kind of magical in that way. It's not always the intent to go at something in particular, but then you find that it's there when you look back at it. And it's an exciting tool, because then you can have readers come to a project and take away lessons that you might have intended, and then some that you didn't. That's talking about things that are happening in their real life, but they're reading about robots or aliens or time travel, which is one of my favorite genres, or multiverses, which is a great way to think about like paths not taken, and what if, and looking at regret. It's really great, thematic ground for that kind of stuff. So yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Luke, your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate completely with what Rebecca and Cadwell have just said. And I'm just trying to think of what I can kind of add to that. My own my story collection is like, I mean, there's some stories that are kind of sci-fi, there's some stories that are probably really not, but they're all very like strange things are happening in them. And it's the sort of conceit of the collection was a way of thinking about, I mean, I think perhaps metaphorizing a more kind of interior experience than what Rebecca and Cadwell have been talking about, like really just thinking about what it is to feel like your interior reality and your external reality are misaligned. And I think that like sci-fi and speculative stuff lends itself really, really well to that, because yeah, it's just like a more direct way of getting at that than I might be able to if I was like writing explicitly about like mental illness or like parental abuse or gaslighting or hypocrisy, which are all sort of like things that are thematically floating around in the back of the collection.
I definitely saw that in certain disasters, all those, everything you've mentioned there in that story. And Justin, I definitely found that in many of your stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, for me, I know it's not all, but a lot of science fiction is about the future. And when thinking about the future and the opportunities there, I also think about the past. If we think 100, 200 years ago, it's easier in the present to like have judgment on the past, to say that was wrong, that was right, to remove ourselves from that because it's not something that we're living in. And I think in the present, it's a lot harder, I think, for people because everybody is the hero of their own story. So, it's harder to get, that's why you have like such disagreements, whereas people don't argue too much about the past that I see, not as much as the present. And I think that thinking about the future has the opportunity for that as well, where you could present people with something that is parallel to what's going on now, but removed in some way so that you can kind of start on a fresh slate with them. And say what it is that you may be trying to say, or just what the story that comes out of you or your experiences, like your lived experiences, how it comes out on the page. So definitely for me, almost a lot of my stories are thinking about like what's going on today, whether it's an issue, whether it's some cool tech. I'm going through medicine and becoming a doctor, being exposed to a lot of that, and then thinking, okay, where is this line going to go in the future. Really quickly, one of the stories in my collection, The World Wasn't Ready for You, which is also the title of the collection, deals with my anxieties about being, a Black man in the country and raising Black boys, and now at the time Black boys, and now also a Black girl. And reflecting on 3 years ago, all that was not new, but that came to the forefront kind of in the country. And okay, how do I write about these feelings? But also write about it kind of removed from what like everybody's going to bring to the page already. So, putting it into like, a near / far future setting where, thinking of interspecies relationships, and thinking and bringing somebody to that and really processing the emotions that I have presently, but using science fiction to kind of take it out of that present. And then another thing really quick, like the novel that I'm working on that I'm, is due in like a couple days. It's about AI. And it's funny because I started it 10 years ago, and just so happens now, like, AI has blown up. So it's very interesting. Like now, a lot of the things that I thought about, and wondered about are the same questions that are coming up now. So that's actually pretty like validating, rewarding, but also seeing just how things are developing. That's definitely like informing, how I'm putting the finishing touches on this, and seeing like where the lines are right now, where they're going, and thinking all the different ways they might branch out. And I think it's really an opportunity to not just warn, but also to give, I think, hope for what technology could do or can do if used in the right way.
I thought that very much of that story you just mentioned, that it really was such a moving story, but it was a really great way to tell a very important, to look at really important issue, but to do it in a way that would bring all readers in and really be moved by it. I am going to I say that I'll stick on. Even though you're ending on the optimistic note right now, I'm going to stick to the more dystopic view for just the next question, anyways. But not necessarily has to be a pessimistic answer by any means. I do think that science fiction can be credited, or many people will argue that it can be credited with having already changed our world a little bit for the better in the past. And so what I mean by this is that the science fiction of the 40s and the 1950s, where when you had books and movies like 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, these were works that kind of warned us about repressive society, what could happen if this went on, and we allowed Big Brother to monitor every aspect of our lives, or we allowed McCarthyism to continue. And then one could also argue that works like On the Beach, A Canticle for Leibowitz, and Dr. Strangelove, and other works really helped us forestall, sort of a headlong rush that we seem to be having into nuclear warfare to resolve our issues. So we have seen that, at least in the optimistic, I guess, somewhat optimistic view, the dystopic science fiction has helped us not necessarily end up in those worlds, at least so far. Today's world may make us wonder a little bit, but I wondered if each of you, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but I wanted to hear more about how your fiction of today, do you think it will help us shape the future in a positive way? So, so I'd like to hear your opinions directly addressing that topic. And Justin, could go back to you if you'd like to further expand on that, if you'd like to.
Yeah, the thing that's most top of mind right now is the novel I'm working on with AI, and it's very topical right now. And one of the things that I explore in it is, as a doctor. Well, okay, so I think a lot of what you're seeing with whether it's creatives, and a lot with creatives, I don't think it's just about like being pushed out of jobs. I think that it's about something about the human spirit that can't be recreated by like like AI, right? And, you know, wanting a future for ourselves where like all our stories aren't like kind of taken out of that human spirit. It's just like it would be formulaic. And with I think that exists in medicine too. You know, I think that AI can be a great tool for, you know, enhancing us, you know, enhancing like the things that we can be able to detect. I see a future where, you know, based on how my a computer is going to be able to detect how my tone is changing, how my temperature is changing during this meeting right now, and say like, hey, you're going to have a heart attack in 10 years, or you're, you know, if you don't change this or that. But I think that if in the same way, if we give it all over to the system, then I think that we as humans are going to kind of lose something really important that comes with like human to human interaction. Um, so in my story right now, I'm thinking about how that can go wrong. And I think that with fiction, part of it is that you hopefully you're exaggerating, you know, you're taking what can go wrong and it's like it becomes like the big part of the story. And I think that doing that is so that as you read it, you can be like, what I will want you to come away with the book is, you know, this technology could be awesome, but we need to wield it in the right way. You know, different than, for example, like with the Terminator. It was just that the I think the message of that was just like, you know, don't go down this route. Whereas, you know, I think that technology can be a great thing in like pushing us forward, but I do think that it needs to be used in a responsible way. So I think that, you know, what I'm writing now is my thoughts about, you know, how it could be not not necessarily misused, but if we sleep on it, um, we could find ourselves in like the back seat.
Sounds to me that sounds great. As someone who currently is dealing with a massive spam of chat GPT, I like to think there's a bright side. Um, Luke, do you have could you have thoughts on this subject too about
Yeah, I mean, uh I can't imagine that the way that I'm writing about science or technology, because it is so unrelated to reality, would have any impact on anything. It's like like there's a story in my collection that's like someone buys a bottomless hole on the internet so she can throw her garbage into it. You know, it's like I'm not saying anything about technology other than just consumerism and trash. But I mean, I will say, like, you know, I don't know that this is exclusive to speculative and sci-fi, or the speculative and sci-fi qualities of my work, but I do think like it was really important to me in writing these stories, which not all, but most of them feature trans characters. And it was important to me, number one, that nothing like intensely tragic is happening related to people being trans, but also that they were like that, even for the characters, like there's like a few characters for whom like they're like teenagers in the midst of transition, and in the midst of figuring out gender stuff, that it was not the main thing going on with them. And to me, I felt like it was really important for me to put that in the collection, because I found that when I was starting to work on these stories, it was so hard for me to imagine trans characters in a story where the plot didn't hinge on them being trans, that it became kind of an interesting puzzle for me to be like, what is that block in my imagination? And if I have that, you know, like, you know, I started this book, I don't know, 12 years ago. And I had started transitioning like, I don't know, like 12 years before or 10 years before that. And so I was like, if I have that problem and like half the people in my life are trans and I've spent my entire adult life moving through the world like in a trans body, like what does that tell me about the blocks in the collective imagination for just being like, oh, I can mentally populate a trans person into this environment? And I think it was important for me to put trans characters in stories that had like sci-fi speculative elements, because it was fun. And I just was like so exhausted by the only trans stories or trans like fiction or nonfiction that I read about trans people being, if not tragic, like kind of boring, like kind of like just very basic, like very like, I mean, at best, like solid domestic realism, but like just, I was like, I want to see like playful, strange, weird things happening around trans characters that are like fully emotionally developed. So whether or not, I won't tell you how many copies my book has sold, but I'm going to tell you it is not going to change the world at all. But my hope is that for the people who read it, even the people who have trouble seeing past, there are a lot of people who read it and they're like, oh, it's a book about trans people. And it's like, to me, that is sort of missing the point. But I think even for those people, I'm just like, haha, I'm like seeding these images and these people in your mind, and you may not know anyone who's trans, or you may not know anyone intimately who's trans, but now in some part of your subconscious, you can imagine like at least 10 different people.
Cadwell, could you talk about the future, your vision of the future?
Yeah, I have like 5 thoughts in my brain. I'm gonna try to find all of them. So you brought up 1984, and that book was like super important for me. It was like a break, that was my breakthrough book. That was the thing that made me think, oh, maybe I should try writing this kind of stuff, and it definitely made me want to read more of the stuff. One of my favorite books as well is The Dispossessed, and I feel like that's like where 1984 has this very like pessimistic dystopian view of a future system. The Dispossessed has this like very hopeful but complicated view of a future system. It's not necessarily future, but it's happening on this moon, this Earth-like moon, and it's showing this like anarchist society and in all of its colors and all of its shapes. And when we talk about sci-fi, we have a lot of conversation about technology and how technology is going to change the world. But I also, find it really exciting when science fiction talks about social systems and imagining other social systems and how that might impact the world and bring us something that we don't have right now, but we can think about and we can bring into our present and, probably or hopefully try to bring into our futures, wherever we end up. I wrote a story for Asimov, Sheila, When the Rains comes back. That's like this future panarchist society, and that was one of the things that I was trying to do, which is kind of similar to The Dispossessed, wrestle with all the good things that a system like that could bring, but all of the complicated things that it could bring as well. Like try to make it feel like a real thing that that will, at least my hope for the reader to see that even when we try to imagine something better, that's not the end of the journey. We have to do more, and then I worked on another story, Monsters Come Howling in Their Season, which was trying to envision like cooperative AI. So like AI systems that we have now, but what if communities get to govern those systems and what that might bring out, and how that might better the society. In that story was disaster relief. So how could a community AI help with the aftermath of a hurricane? And so to my mind, it's not just how technology is going to change our futures, but how imagining different kinds of social systems is going to change our future. And it's the part of science fiction that gets me really excited to read, to work on, and it provides a lot of not necessarily instruction of how to do it, but inspiration for thinking about what that stuff might look like.
Dispossessed is definitely one of my favorite novels. So Rebecca, let's hear your vision, your story, your path forward.
Yeah, I really resonated a lot with what Luke was saying about kind of setting a challenge or a puzzle that they wanted to solve through their writing. And I think, like Justin, I'm going to talk about my work in progress because I think it hits on this a little bit in a more straightforward manner than my novel does. So yeah, I'm working on a collection of stories, and I started it during the pandemic when I was living in Brooklyn. And it really did, like the early days of the pandemic really did feel to me like the world could be ending. And it was this very surreal time in New York and all around the world, obviously. But like sirens were just constant parade of sirens. 7 o'clock, we all were on our balconies, like banging pots, and just like screaming for essential workers. But if you were me, you were just kind of like screaming into the abyss. And yet, like, I was still expected to be working my same day job from home. And there was something so strange about like logging onto Zoom 20 minutes down the road from where my office was, and suddenly like just doing my same job as these sirens were passing by. And as like, we didn't know anything. Do masks help? Do masks not help? The dog park is closed. Can I walk my dog? It was like just really strange times. And it was hard for me to even write during that period for a lot of reasons. I was like really trapped in a small space and trapped like claustrophobically in my brain. And like I said, it felt like maybe the world was about to end. And so I started this short story that was about the world ending on the same day that a man starts his first day of work. And he's sort of like asked to keep going through his onboarding process anyway. And that led me to a whole bunch of other short stories that were all about the world ending. But what I was interested in all of them was like not just the kind of like tragedy and cataclysm of that, but also just like how surreal and absurd and even like strangely funny there can be humor even in the end times. And sometimes in the book, it's not always. So the story I was just talking about, like aliens are landing like a mile from this person's office, and their boss is like, well, let's just make a photocopy of your birth certificate anyway. But in some of the stories, it's like a much smaller world, but still like, you know, like the death of a parent or the end of college or, a store closing. And like each of those things can also be the end of a world. And as I've been working on these stories and like meeting these characters and kind of like learning how they see the end times, it's been helpful for me to realize like, writing, like I can write even when the world is ending, and I am finding some moments of joy and pleasure and surprise in my writing. And so I hope, like I don't venture to say that like the book, if it becomes a book, will instill that upon the reader, but that's certainly my hope, that it could change the world in that way, that like we could all learn to find some hope and happiness, even if and even when.
Really, I agree with you that humor is very important in some of the darkest stories. Some of the most, it just has that moment of the break with humor is often just partly why it just increases the reader's enjoyment. I think, there's that often happens in horror movies too. They're, just to lighten the mood a little bit. It can, because life isn't all horror, isn't all the end of the world, and humor helps at funerals too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit, and actually it was touched on. My next question, I think, was touched on a little bit earlier. One thing I was really impressed with reading all of your works was the kind of non-linear approach to time. And I was I was curious about why you made these creative choices, and how did thinking about the past, present, and future at the same time affect your process and your vision for your stories, and how does that affect your view of science fiction? I think that this kind of question, it might sound a little vague, but I'm thinking of both time travel and maybe alternate world type travel. Either way, they all kind of use time differently, or telling stories backwards, sideways, forwards at the same time. I just found all of that fascinating. I wondered if you'd be interested in talking about your use of time in your work. Do you mind if I start with you, Rebecca? Since your novel definitely struck me that gave me part of the idea for this question.
Yeah. So I think this time I will talk about my novel. My novel is called The Museum of Human History, and it centers on a young girl who falls into a coma and she stops physically aging. And she's in this strange coma for like a quarter of a century, for 25 years. And we meet a bunch of characters who find themselves drawn to her for a lot of different reasons, and we see all of their stories and their pasts, and they all live in this kind of futuristic city that itself has like a deep, meaningful past, like going back to ancient times. So we also see some of that past in the book. And in terms of time, the book covers like over 30,000 years or something kind of crazy, which was a big challenge in the writing process to keep track of all the different timelines and all of the different characters. And the characters interact in small ways at small moments and in some bigger ways at bigger moments. But yeah, in terms of writing process with time, managing all of that time was a true challenge for me, probably the biggest challenge in writing that novel, because one small change to one character in their life would set off all of these ripple effects in other places that sometimes I wouldn't even track down on the first revision, and I'd find them later. But that also felt kind of like a metaphor for the way life does work, and this idea that we were talking about just briefly earlier of like forking paths and how easy it would be not to kind of come into contact with the people who end up having really meaningful, proving really meaningful to our lives. So yeah, so time was like a big sort of thing I had to keep in my mind as I was writing and editing and revising. And then it's also thematically, I think one of the major themes of the novel is like this young girl who stops aging is living a life outside of time. And what does that mean? And a lot of the characters, I think, are sort of attracted to that because there is an appeal to just, time does cause a lot of pain, but without that pain, what is a life? So there's this way in which in the novel, pain and time and memory are kind of all braided together, and in some ways like one and the same. Like you can't really give up aging without also giving up memory or giving up, the best parts of life as well as sometimes the painful ones. Yeah.
Thanks. Cadwell, do you have thoughts of that about the use of time in your work or parallel universe or any of that?
Yeah, I'm just like thinking about Rebecca's answer. I find so me. I hope I can talk about this, Rebecca. Me and Rebecca were in a workshop, hopefully again soon, and I got a chance to read a great amount of this book, and what I found like really simpatico about the things that we like working on is these community views, right? So looking at how communities kind of circle around certain events or certain things that are happening within the community. And to me, that's a kind of, time travel, because all of these different people are in different parts of their lives and they're kind of like living in the same space and interpreting things differently because of not just who they are, but where they are in their timeline. And it's really exciting to read something like, Rebecca's book, where you just have, I have no idea how you did that, have that span of time, and then exploring what that means to all of these different people that are kind of like crossing paths with this place that has this really long history, but then also these events that have these really long histories that it's not just happening in the present, it's happening in the past, and these things will play out in the future. And I think about the fact that I like working on like multiverse stories and thinking about time travel and that kind of stuff. And I think some of that has to do with anxiety. Like I feel like in my mind, I'm constantly in the present, worrying about something that happened 5 years ago, and like I'm nervous about something that's going to happen next week, right? And so I feel like that kind of stuff just shows up in my interest in stories, where I have characters that are desperately, they're stuck in a particular place, but they want to know about everywhere else all at once. And so they're kind of like pushing against the limitations of where they are to try to find some answer that's going to give them peace, right? I have a character in this trilogy I'm working on who can kind of move around in time and space, and when you get inside his head, he's just like deeply insecure and fearful, and that that's the kind of the motivation for how he uses this ability that he has. And it's something that, I'm grateful I don't have that ability, because then I would spend all my time, searching for things in the future, in the past, and, doing all this stuff, to kind of like calm my own anxieties. And so I feel like, we talk about like roads not traveled and that kind of stuff for these, with these kinds of stories, but I think it's also about like fear, and this kind of like um, deep, profound anxiety that can sometimes be overwhelming.
Yes, which we all feel, I think. Um, Luke, I noticed in your bio that you're working on a time travel novel. So I made me think you might have some thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, there's there's one story in the collection that has a little bit of time slippage. But yeah, I am thinking about this a lot in my current book. I mean, yeah, so I have cancer, and my experience of going through treatment several times, and also like dealing with like, a sort of whole range of prognoses, has been just making me think about time a lot, both in the sense of like, um, you know, just sitting with the reality that I am probably going to die young, and how to feel not screwed over about that. Part of the kind of way to live with that in my head is to think about time differently, and to think about it less as like a kind of tangible. I mean, it's not really time, as far as I understand it as a layperson, is not like, it doesn't actually work the way that we culturally perceive it, as being like sort of like equal little units in a row. But it's also, you know, just going through like treatment, like the way that time changes when you're in a lot of pain, for example, or if you're having, like, I went through a kind of chemo that gave me a bunch of brain damage, and like, some of which I've recovered from and some of which I haven't, which also, like, I was going through chemo the first time in early 2020. So while other people around the world were having brain damage from COVID and sort of similar things, it's sort of like when you don't have access to your memories, when you don't have, I mean, I had a weird thing happen where I, like, my anxiety evaporated because I couldn't ruminate on anything because I couldn't remember anything. It'd be like, I'd get treatment, and the previous 2 weeks would just be like erased. And I'd be like, nah, I guess I'm not that worried about it. I wasn't really worried about the future because I couldn't really imagine it. And so insofar as, like, I mean, I think in general, my work, often the past and the present and the future kind of all get blurred together, because I just think that's how the mind works. I mean, I also really appreciated what you said, Cadwell, about anxiety. That is probably part of it. It's like anxiety plus trauma, and also I'm very interested in the way that, like, intergenerational and kind of like culturally, like the way that history replicates itself, um, and the way traumatic memory feels really immediate, really like it's happening in the present on a physical level. We're experiencing in the present. If we really imagine the future, it's as if it's happening. So I think all of that, to me, it's intuitive that those lines would be blurred.
Yes. Oh, did I lose your sound or did you stop?
I just muted myself.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry that you're going through that, but sounds like you're really doing an amazing job with working, the craft, what is coming out of experience. Because what I've read so far has been just beautiful. So looking forward to your book too. Justin, I was segueing to Justin from, I found you, and you did a really interesting use of time. I'm trying to get the name of the story, but in your collection, your story, that I thought was so, the way you started with that story at the front with the heartbreaking part first, and then moving backward. I just was so moved by it. But I wanted to hear you too. Did you, and do you use that in other works of fiction? Have you played with time too, or is it how? How have you used that in your craft, or do you use it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that my fascination with time has been gone along with my fascination of like consciousness. And I think in the story, I think it was probably like the world wasn't ready for you, which is goes through different times in uh, the main character's son's life. Um, and thinking about it in that way, it's kind of a reflection of how we experience our lives through memories. If I would ask everybody, like, think about what you did today, you don't really think about it in a chronological order. It's not like, oh, I open my eyes and I dig out of bed, etc. You think about it kind of piecemeal, like those all exist like at once, but you're pulling on them. So in the same way, you see like an old friend or a new friend or what have you, you're going to your experience is going to pull from all these different parts of their life, and that's kind of our every living moment. Our we live in the present, but our whole experience is recreated in our brain. The present moment is recreated in our brain based on all of our past experiences, and our brain has a sense of time, but it doesn't solely do that based on like the chronological order. So I tried to show that a little bit in that story, just by being able to switch around. And I think that the way that we perceive time is also fascinating, in terms of how our brain works. There's that kind of that old adage that, time moves faster as you get older, and they've actually studied this. And what happens is that our brain is very is designed to take note of things that are new. So as we get older, it feels like time is going by faster because we are laying down less dense memories. And that's why when people get into like some like a car crash, it seems like time slowed down. And they've done studies where it's actually, the time doesn't actually slow down for someone. Like they can't perceive something that they wouldn't usually be able to. What happens is that in that new event, your brain puts down like more dense memories. So when you play it back, it's, you're playing back more information. So it seems like it's slowed down. So I think that's all fascinating. I think that's great fodder for, just several things to use in speculative fiction. And then, there's the multi-universe thing, black holes. I've explored black holes in one of my stories. And it explored like, the quantum theory and kind of like the where the universe is split off. And in the story I'm working on called quantum psychopathy. So it's I think it's a constant consideration for me. One of the fascinating things, then I'll stop, is thinking about after consciousness or after death, like a second to the person, like when I die, a second after that is going to be the same as like a million years after. you know um that's like a fascinating thing to think about. For the ones that are here, time, you can feel that time. Like if somebody just passed away, it's poignant. But like a million years from now, it's going to be the same to the person who passed away, which is fascinating.
All of that's so true. Thank you for really profound answers to this question. I was, um, do we have any more time for questions, Mayor, or would you?
Yeah, I think we could do one final question before we move to audience Q&A. And I'm also going to remind everybody else who's joined in that this is a good time for you to share your questions in the chat if you'd like to, or you can just raise your hand so that we can invite you to share your question out loud.
Okay, my final question that I have here is, I was thinking of three of you, but I also thought perhaps Luke has some similar experience. But I was thinking of, I really enjoyed the Many Worlds book. It's not really an anthology, is it? It's because it is a collaborative work. And I was thinking of if you wanted to talk about what it was like to work collaboratively on a project like that. And I also wondered, in Luke's case, if you've worked collaboratively with either authors or other artists on projects, if you have a similar experience. But so I don't know who that was. So this is my final question. Cadwell, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, okay. I love that you mentioned that it's not exactly an anthology. We had so many internal conversations about what exactly to call it when we were talking to people about it. It's like a shared world anthology. Is it a collection? Is a collection just one author? So, it was that kind of like ambiguity of like what to call the thing was a lot of it was interesting. It was a lot of fun to kind of, I don't know if we settled on anything in particular. I think it is, we've been saying it's an anthology, but it's not quite. Yeah, it's, I started this, so like I got the first stories for what would become, Many Worlds in like February of 2020. So it was happening like concurrently with the beginning of the pandemic. It was just a surreal time as I was getting, like those very early stories came in, and it just so happened that so many of them were doing similar things. They talk about similar things. I shared a prompt with the, those first submitters, and it came together gradually, slowly, sometimes quickly at other times over the next 3 years. And it was just so much of it, though it seems, very, very intentional. So much of it was that kind of magic where, the things that came in were just talking to each other in a very, particular way. And we just did a lot of we just had a lot of conversations about how to curate that. And we had a lot of help from Radix about how to curate that, And so I really love the anthology. Here I am calling it an anthology again. And I love how it came together. And, we had when in the later stage of like planning it out, we started having conversations about like, well, maybe we should have some stories in there that's doing some tying together work. And so thematically they all tie together, but we also have a story by one of our other writers, Josh, that's like a traveler story that's about like, characters traveling across universes and that kind of stuff. We have another story that we co-wrote, me and 4 other writers under a pseudonym called Darkly Lem, that it's also a traveler story. And so those 2 stories that kind of came together later on helped do the final kind of like pushing all of that stuff together. And it was, it's been a fun, exciting, and very challenging process. Working with authors is so rewarding, but it's also, we all have our, ways of how we want to do things. And so, when we do butt heads, I think that ultimately at the end of it, we come out with something better, but there's quite a lot of button heads because, we all have our own like creative visions and stuff. So it's definitely challenging. It's not, I would recommend it, but I would warn you that, for people that want to do kind of collaborative work like this, that it takes energy, but I think the result is extremely rewarding. And the kind of closeness you develop with people that you're creating with together is also extremely rewarding. By the end of it, like me and the other members of Darkly Lem, this 5-person pseudonym, we're very close now. And it's because we've just been building and building and building worlds together. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question. All my feelings at once is basically what I just gave you.
What I was looking for. And it sounds a little bit like just world building in general, but having to do it with people, not just with creating a world. Do Rebecca or Justin do you have thoughts on working on that project as collaborators, or any other collaborations you've done?
I can jump in. Yeah, as Cadwell mentioned earlier, we were in a workshop together for many years, which is where I first heard of this Many Worlds project from Cadwell. I think in like the earlier stages, and to be honest, just like anything Cadwell is involved with, I'm like, yes, I want to do that too. So yeah, he sort of sent each of us the premise and what he was thinking it would become. And the really interesting thing about my work in that book is that it was already written, and it was not written specifically to be part of this shared multiverse. It was already written and published. And I was like, this belongs in this world. It was interesting for me to get to look at my own work in like a brand new way and give it the new context that like Cadwell and everybody else was creating, and see what else it could be if it was part of this larger whole. And I just like, it's just so cool to think of, I feel like sometimes we think of writing as a really solitary pursuit, and intentionally so, where there's aspects of it that sort of feel like people hold things close to the chest and they don't want to give a lot away. And I think it's really just amazing to see like how we might break down those boundaries and what we can create if given the chance to work together on things.
Thank you. And Justin?
Yeah, it was it's really cool to be able to be part of like something collaborative. I think in the same, it's something I've always wanted to do and probably still strive to do in my own work. I really like admire like Stephen King, like the different stories, like how they are intertwined, and I did that a little bit in the collection. And then like being able to do that across different minds, being able to pull from somebody else's story, or even allow your world to go forth and be able to be played in, with consent, because the AI does consent, but is an awesome thing. And I don't know if this is opening old wounds, but Cadwell and I had actually been on another collaborative project, that was like that was, we were in like a cool writer's room, and it was great. It was a great experience. And I think being able to, that was like something where it was like an episodic project where, you come up with the whole plot line, and you're really talking back and forth about the whole story. And then you see everybody's like expertise, like their way of thinking about things, approaching stories. And I think that, I was, how you say you don't want to be, you want to be the opposite of the smartest in the room. I definitely was like the person who entered in through the back door, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at these people, look at them work. So I think it's great for that too, just to be in that creative space. So I definitely, I definitely like collaborating. It can be an exhausting thing, I think, just in terms of, wanting to honor other people's thoughts, be up to speed with other people, like interact well with other people. But I think when it works out, it's very rewarding. Yeah, heart is still broken. Yeah.
What about you, Luke?
Say it again.
Luke, I was just asking Luke, what about you?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
I mean, I haven't worked in that kind of formal collaborative way, but I think I really like to like workshop stuff. And I mean, this collection was like brewing for a decade, and also I wrote, I was working on the collection for a decade, and I was also with my ex-spouse for that exact same decade. And he's a performance artist and critical theorist, and also actually a really excellent fiction writer, an essayist. But every story in that collection, it's like full of jokes that were inserted to make him laugh. And and we also would like, while I was working on all of these stories and he was working on his own stuff, we would like gossip about characters and be like, oh my God, can you believe what so-and-so did? Like, and so, for me, this collection is like, there's like a whole decade-long conversation with him that's like in between the lines. And he also, like, just as I edit a lot of his stuff, he edited a lot of my stuff. And also then, my agent edited it, my editor edited it. So it's also like, and plus so many of these stories went through like many workshops too. So I think in that sense, like, I know that that's not how everyone's process works, but for me, as soon as I write a sentence, I want to read it out loud, and I want to see how someone else reacts to it. And if I get stuck, I want to hear their ideas. So writing to me is always very collaborative in that way.
Can be very much a collaborative process. So those are all my questions. Hera, do you want to open it up to the audience?
Yeah, thank you all so much. That was such an incredible conversation. I felt like I could hear you folks talk about just what it is to write with this potent, within this potent genre, which is so imaginative and opens up so many landscapes. And I want to invite people, if they have any questions, we'd love to see a show of hands or something like that. That might be the best way to go about it. I see that Helen has a question. Helen, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. Why not? I think I'm probably the oldest person on your list here today because I'm 94. And so when I was reading science fiction in my youth, when I really started, and by the way, I love the term speculation fiction better than science fiction, because my view of science fiction was, isn't it wonderful when I can read a science fiction book and the fiction becomes science? So I'm going to ask the panel if that is ever in your mind. And also, how do you think that was working when it was working? And it really was. There were, Jules Verne's and all those other guys that I read when I was young. Their stuff became science, not fiction anymore. So how do you think about that?
It's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
No, you go, Cadwell.
Are you sure? I was just gonna say, like, it's a bit harder now to like do the speculation that becomes science, because I feel like there's so much more the scientists know, and I don't know, like I feel like back in the past you could kind of like throw a stone and it would hit something, and now I feel like it's more playing off of things that we already know are at least theoretically possible. At least when I write, I'm thinking about like, well, there's all of this mountain of like speculation already about this thing. There's real science about this thing. It's more like projection, I think, when I'm thinking about in terms of technology, in terms of social systems. I don't know if I hope oftentimes, like I remember reading The Dispossessed, I just keep bringing up this book, and I was so in love with that system that I really wanted to see it in the world. But it's hard to bring about. Social systems are hard won. I think that like the speculation is more fruitful when you don't try to think about, well, is this necessarily possible given the present? It's in its bones, it's a hopeful exercise, I think, when I'm doing that kind of speculation.
Thank you. That's why I think I love the speculation fiction rather than science fiction in this day and age. I love that terminology. I hadn't ever heard of it before.
Something I was thinking of, and I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from my fellow panelists on this one. To me, it gives me some stress when what I thought was science fiction in my writing actually becomes science. In my book, there's biotech companies that are trying to kind of like feed into people's desire to stay young and not age, and also just like the obsession with appearance in general, and like Ozempic, the like weight loss drug that nobody really knows how it works, and it's just kind of coming into the news at around the same time my book was coming out. And something about that, I feel like, because the pace maybe of like scientific advancement is just like really accelerated these days. If you're someone who like me likes to write about a world that is a shade different from ours, sometimes it's like, oh, I thought this was going to be different, but actually it's right up at the door again. It feels like running away from something that's like just behind me sometimes.
Great. Thank you.
I hope the things I write, some of it comes true. And some of it I expect. I think for me, I usually like, though I haven't done too much ocean, but I usually like to think about things in what I think are the last three final frontiers in science, which is, I think, the brain, the ocean, and space. I think that we know the least about those three things. So it means I feel like I'm simultaneously more likely. It's possible that the bizarre things I come up with could be right, and it's also possible that none of it could be right at all. But it's good to kind of have like those gaps to write in, especially when you get into stuff like like when we're talking about time, or like quantum mechanics and all that stuff, when physics gets like really weird. Multiple universes could exist. Like that's it seems like something that's just kind of like Marvel fantasy, but it's like it could be real. We could be living in a simulation. You know what I mean? All that stuff, really seems like but actually those are probably things that we may never actually figure out. So it's kind of, yeah. So I don't know. It could already be true. We just might not know it, but we don't know it.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Are there more questions or
I
Yeah,
see
more
a hand from Isabella.
Hi. My question is it like with the times we live in today and like everything that we see on the news and what's going on, like what Miss Bergman said exactly about like how she writes about science fiction, but then it seems like it's like right behind her, like just like something that she's running away from. That's right. I love that because that's exactly what I feel like when I'm trying to write, but then I see the news and I'm like, that's not fiction anymore, it's real. So I guess what my question is gonna be is like, do you have trouble like writing something positive or fun? Because again, back to Rebecca Bergman about what she said about how she wrote about like the world was ending on this guy's first day of work. That actually sounds like fun, and like that's like that concept never really occurred to me when I was reading like all these science fiction books, especially the classics, because they all seem intense. They all seem very intense and a bit melancholic, because like they all center around these like serious questions and topics that everyone's afraid of, that everyone's like anxiously waiting for the answer, more or less. And then it's like, but then she comes in and it's like, well, what if I write the story about the end of the world on the guy's first day of work? That sounds hilarious. So it's like do you guys have trouble doing it, or does it even come to your minds when you write about science fiction? Because to me that seems so like I want to read it, because like I said, usually when I read science fiction it's just really intense and survival, and like there's no time for fun, not really. Like maybe for things like Star Wars, but like with literature it's like I don't know, it's like I have a hard time imagining it, even though it's like yeah, it could be fun, but like does fun come easy to you when you're writing about all these topics and like stories in the science fiction genre? So I guess yeah.
I can dive in on that because this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I find that I really can't write. Like I get very stuck. I actually had a novel that I just recently abandoned, and I realized that the problem with it was that it was very serious. And I find that I can't, like, the pressure to sort things out morally, and also just like the fact that I don't want to traumatize readers, but I also want to be realistic about about how the world is, has made me have to just be like, okay, like there has to be a joke baked into the premise. And I do sort of like, most of the stuff that I do starts from sort of a premise that's kind of hilarious to me. And then I just sort of spin out from there, and that helps me keep it light. But I feel like that makes it so I can talk about the more serious feelings. And I'm just actually thinking of like I've just read two books, one that's like, well, I'm in the middle of the book that's kind of like, I guess, science fiction, and another one that's more speculative. But I also think those borders are like, I'm not that invested in the genre categories. But a hell of a book by Jason Mott, I just finished, and I'm currently in the middle of My Murder by Katie Williamson, she has another book that's also hilarious. And both of them are like dealing with really serious subjects. Like hell of a book is about grief and like anti-Black violence and like police violence and being marginalized in the publishing industry. And My Murder is about like just like the ways that women get kind of like compartmentalized, like themselves get kind of compartmentalized via motherhood, but also like misogynistic violence, like, and to different degrees. Both of those books are really funny. And I think it makes it feel like engaging with those. And also like Insurrecto by Gina Apostol, Black Wave by Michelle T. These are all sort of books that are very weird, but they're dealing with really heavy stuff, but they are so funny and so playful. And I think like as a writer, I feel like it's a gift you can give yourself to like go hang out inside a joke you're telling yourself. and like explore real feelings through that, but like not be like beating your head against the worst parts of the world every second of the day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think too, like the world is a really serious and hard place for like a lot of different reasons. Writing can be a really like hard thing to do with a lot of rejection and a lot of uphill battles. And I just don't think I would be able to do it if I didn't find ways to have fun while also doing it. So like I kind of have to be doing something kind of playful or silly or just like try, at least to me it's funny while I'm writing, or else I could, yeah, I just have to give up otherwise.
I've been thinking that my answer to this question is that the further I've gone from my MFA, the more the more I allow myself to have fun in my writing. And I think that has been, it saved me in a lot of ways, right? I have this project, this trilogy I'm working on is very, very serious. But the project that I've started playing around with in that comes after it is fun, and I find myself like, just thinking about it. And I just think that if you're having fun in your work, there's a better chance that your reader is going to have fun in the work as well, and that having fun in your work and doing stuff that is serious isn't like mutually exclusive. I used to think that they were, without even thinking about it, but now I'm like, can you have fun and think about things? Of course, and that's, I feel like great work comes out of that. The last thing I'll say is that in my collaborative work, the work that I've been doing with many worlds, I've just been having a ton of fun, and I feel like that is totally, one of the things that helps bring that project together. That we're having so much fun as we're trying to do serious things.
Can I
Yeah, for
jump
me,
in? Oh,
oh,
sorry.
yeah.
I want Justin go first. Justin, go first.
I'll just say real quick, one of the stories in my collection, I originally written it for unidentified funny objects, didn't get in there, but it's in the collection. It's pretty funny. And another one that I wrote was actually a romance story that's based on the pandemic. It's like, because I didn't need to write anything that tells you how miserable the pandemic is. So it's kind of envisioning a future that's a little bit horrible, but in that, with that backdrop, like a sweet love story, because I think that there has to be hope in all things. I mean, there's some stories I don't want to be fun or to laugh at, right? Like in the one I was talking about, the world wasn't ready for you, because it deals with like, I can't breathe, and all these things. But there are those tender moments that I take from like that what makes it sad later, in terms of, that I have my kids, or fun that I have with my kids, and you put that into the page. And I think that I think it gives you energy to then, stab the reader in the heart, so.
Which you did. I think I want to answer that just briefly from the point of view of as a curator, as the editor of a magazine. I always say writers write tragic, and readers want they want fun, and they want the optimistic often, that's not obviously cut and dry, but it tends to be. Um, it, and when I put the magazine together, the nice thing for me is I can have both. I can have the whole thing, because I can have the deeply tragic story, and I can put the really funny story next to it. And so I can, the nice thing about a magazine, and it's similar with a collection, an anthology of stories, is you can change, it's not going to be all one mood. And I find that readers really enjoy that, having the tension broken a little by different types of stories within each issue. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
All right. Thank you so much for your answers and for your honesty. I really appreciate it. And I'm relieved too.
Thank you, Isabella, for that wonderful question. If there is anybody here who has another question, please let me know. I was hoping, yes, Alexander, I see a hand.
Hey everybody. I have a super simple question for writers, which is, when you sit down to work, who are you writing for generally?
What I want to be the true answer is just for myself. Like the thing I was just saying before, like just trying to have fun or play, or Luke's answer, like putting a puzzle down to try to solve. But it's hard to keep that that mentality. That's like what I want to be true. It's not always. Sometimes other voices leak in, but
I say really, I started off writing for myself. And I think that the stories are for myself. Like, it was a cool story. I think that because of who I am, like as a black man in this country, as a father, as a psychiatrist. There's a lot, I feel like I can't just pull from my experiences. I have to be responsible about them, because I just end up just writing from what I know. There's a lot of people that I may represent, and I want to be responsible for that. So I do end up having a responsibility to wanting people to feel heard when they read my stuff. So I'm writing for you.
Sorry, I think my connection was unstable for a second. I want to answer that quickly and say, yeah, I would say myself, but I feel like, what that means has changed over the years. And also it's harder to do that the more, you write and publish. I feel like the voices do come in. And so it's, I try to preserve at least that first draft to me, and then as you do, you start thinking about, well, who's going to read this thing, and then that enters into the conversation later. I really like what Justin said about being responsible, and I think about that too. Like early on, decisions that I made in my debut novel, for example, like my debut novel had like a high death toll, and I lost sleep over it after the fact, and so then I, when I was working on my next book, I was like, I'm not going to kill a lot of people this time. I just kept telling that to myself. And so I feel like that responsibility thing is super important. And, as you stop just thinking about yourself, you start thinking about, well, what's your responsibility to readers? What's your responsibility to society? So I kill less people now.
I think it totally depends on the draft stage, but I would say in the first draft, I really just write for myself or for whoever I think I might read some parts of it too. And then maybe later I start thinking about what it's going to do. If other people read it, if it reaches an audience, but I also just know that it's going to go through so many changes. I don't worry that much about also like I have the luxury of no one's paying any attention to me, so I can write whatever I want.
Thank you, folks, for those responses. I feel like that's a great note. Thank you, Alexandra, for that question. That's a great note to pause and end today's panel, unless anybody else has any question that we're missing. Hopefully, no. Please feel free to put in the chat if you're missing anyone. But thank you all for joining. As editors who are just and just publishers who are excited about science fiction, it is amazing that there is this entire genre that doesn't just look at the future with concern, but also with a lot of hope. And it feels like that's something we could do with right now. What a strange time to be holding this panel this weekend, particularly for the Brooklyn Book Festival, as we're looking at how unprepared the city is to deal with a climate crisis, right? Especially with everything going on this weekend. So it's a nice reminder to know that, as Luke said very succinctly, that science fiction may not change the world in an immediate way, but it could always be turned to to talk about the world, to discuss the world, to sort of remind people that there's a future to be concerned about, to think about, to wonder about, and to imagine about. And on that note, I want to thank our panelists and our moderator, Sheila Williams, for joining us, for taking time off their busy lives, their busy schedules, and sharing their thoughts. For all of you folks, if you go up the chat, you will see links to all of their books. I would really recommend you buy them. We've got a bunch of debut works releasing this year from this panel, and I would really urge you to check them out. You can also check out radixmedia.org, which is our website. Just to remind you again, we have the coupon code bookend for you to enjoy 10% off. I hope those of you in New York are able to enjoy the Brooklyn Book Festival tomorrow and are inspired to get out. It's a nice weather, so it's going to be different from the last couple of days. And we hope we get to see you. We are at booth 603. I want to thank Rebecca, Luke, Cadwell, Justin, and Sheila for this incredible conversation. This discussion will be put up on YouTube, so you can access it again in the future and take notes and revisit many times. Thank you all. Feel free to email us if you have any questions. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.